Enlil arrives on Earth, establishes Nibiru as mission control center. Enki establishes sea routes to southern Africa, organizes gold mining operations. 360,000 The Nephilim establish Batibar as their metallurgical center for smelting and refining. Sipper, the spaceport, and other cities of the gods are built. 300,000 The Anunnaki mutiny. Man, the primitive worker, is fashioned by an Herzog. 250,000 Early Homo sapiens multiply, spread to other continents. 200,000 Life on Earth regresses during new glacial period. 100,000 Climate warms again. The sons of the gods take the daughters of man as wives. 77,000 Ubar-22/Lamech, a human of divine parentage, assumes the reign in Shur-Atak under the patronage of Herzog. 75,000 The accusation of Earth Anu Isigo begins. Regressive types of man roam Earth. 49,000 The reign of Zecharia, a faithful servant of Enki, begins. 38,000 The harsh climatic period of the seven passings begins to decimate mankind. Europe's Neanderthal man disappears, only Cro-Magnon man based in the Nibiru survives. Enlil, disenchanted with mankind, seeks its demise. 13,000 The Nephilim, aware of the impending tidal wave that will be triggered by the nearing 12th planet, vow to let mankind perish. The deluge sweeps over Earth, abruptly ending the Ice Age. The deluge, a traumatic experience for mankind, was no less so for the gods, the Nephilim. In the words of the Sumerian king lists, the deluge had swept over, and an effort of 120 shars was wiped away overnight. The South African mines, the cities in Mesopotamia, the control center at Nibiru, the spaceport at Sipar, all lay buried underwater and mud. Hovering in their shuttlecraft above devastated Earth, the Nephilim impatiently awaited the abatement of the waters so that they could set foot again on solid ground. How were they going to survive henceforth on Earth when their cities and facilities were gone, and even their manpower? Mankind was totally destroyed. When the frightened, exhausted, and hungry groups of Nephilim finally landed on the peaks of the Mount of Salvation, they were clearly relieved to discover that man and beast alike had not perished completely. Even Enlil, at first enraged to discover that his aims had been partly frustrated, soon changed his mind. The deity's decision was a practical one. Faced with their own dire conditions, the Nephilim cast aside their inhibitions about man, rolled up their sleeves, and lost no time in imparting to man the arts of growing crops and cattle. Since survival, no doubt, depended on the speed with which agriculture and animal domestication could be developed to sustain the Nephilim, and to rapidly multiplying mankind, the Nephilim applied their advanced scientific knowledge to the task. Unaware of the information that could be gleaned from the biblical and Sumerian texts, many scientists who have studied the origins of agriculture have arrived at the conclusion that its discovery by mankind some 13,000 years ago was related to the neothermal newly warm elimity that followed the end of the last ice ago. Long before modern scholars, however, the Bible also related the beginnings of agriculture to the aftermath of the deluge. Sowing and harvesting were described in Genesis as divine gifts granted to Noah and his offspring as part of the post-diluvial covenant between the deity and mankind. For as long as the earth's days shall be, there shall not cease sowing and harvesting, cold and warm, summer and winter, day and night. Having been granted the knowledge of agriculture, Noah, as a husbandman, was first, and he planted a vineyard. He became the first post-diluvial farmer engaged in the deliberate, complicated task of planting. The Sumerian texts, too, ascribe to the gods the granting to mankind of both agriculture and the domestication of animals. Tracing the beginnings of agriculture, modern scholars have found that it appeared first in the Near East, but not in the fertile and easily cultivated plains and valleys. Rather, agriculture began in the mountains skirting the low-lying plains in a semicircle. Why would farmers avoid the plains and limit their sowing and reaping to the more difficult mountainous terrain? The only plausible answer is that the low-lying lands were, at the time when agriculture began, uninhabitable. 13,000 years ago, the low-lying areas were not yet dry enough following the deluge. Millennia passed before the plains and valleys had dried sufficiently to permit the people to come down from the mountains surrounding Mesopotamia and to settle the low-lying plains. This, indeed, is what the book of Genesis tells us. Many generations after the deluge, people arriving from the east, from the mountainous areas east of Mesopotamia, found a plain in the land of Shinar Sumer, and settled there. The Sumerian texts state that Enlil first spread cereals in the hill country, in the mountains, not in the plains, and that he made cultivation possible in the mountains by keeping the flood waters away. He barred the mountains as with a door. The name of this mountainous land east of Sumer, Elam, meant house, where vegetation germinated. Later, two of Enlil's helpers, the gods Nibiru and Ninmada, extended the cultivation of cereals to the low-lying plains, so that, eventually, Sumer, the land that knew not grain, came to know grain. Scholars who have now established that agriculture began with the domestication of wild emmer as a source of wheat and barley are unable to explain how the earliest grains, like those found at the Shined Dark Age, were already uniform and highly specialized. Thousands of generations of genetic selection are needed by nature to acquire even a modest degree of sophistication. Yet the period, time, or location in which such a gradual and very prolonged process might have taken place on Earth are nowhere to be found. There is no explanation for this but an genetic miracle, unless the process was not one of natural selection, but of artificial manipulation. Spelt, a hard-grained type of wheat, poses an even greater mystery. It is the product of an unusual mixture of botanic genes, neither development from one genetic source, nor a mutation of one source. It is definitely the result of mixing the genes of several plants. The whole notion that man, in a few thousand years, changed animals through domestication, is also questionable. Modern scholars have no answers to these puzzles, nor to the general question of why the mountainous semicircle in the ancient Near East became a continuous source of new varieties of cereals, plants, trees, fruits, vegetables, and domesticated animals. The Sumerians knew the answer. The seeds, they said, were a gift sent to Earth by Anu from his celestial abode. Wheat, barley, and hemp were lowered to Earth from the 12th planet. Agriculture and the domestication of animals were gifts given to mankind by Enlil and Enki, respectively. Not only the presence of the Nephilim, but also the periodic arrivals of the 12th planet in Earth's vicinity seem to leave behind the three crucial phases of man's post-diluvial civilization: agriculture, circa 11,000 BC, the Neolithic culture, circa 7,500 BC, and the sudden civilization of 3800 BC took place at intervals of 3,600 years. It appears that the Nephilim, passing knowledge to man, in measured doses, did so in intervals matching the periodic returns of the 12th planet to Earth's vicinity. It was as though some on-site inspection, some face-to-face consultation possible only during the window period that allowed landings and takeoffs between Earth and the 12th planet had to take place among the gods before another go-ahead could be given. The Epic of Etana provides a glimpse of the deliberations that took place. In the days that followed the deluge, it says the great Anunnaki who decreed the fates sat exchanging their counsels regarding the land. They who created the four regions, who set up the settlements, who oversaw the land, were too lofty for mankind. The Nephilim, we are told, reached the conclusion that they needed an intermediary between themselves and the masses of humans. They decided to be gods, elongated, meaning lofty ones. As a bridge between themselves as lords and mankind, they introduced kingship on Earth, appointing a human ruler who would assure mankind's service to the gods and channel the teachings and laws of the gods to the people. A text dealing with the subject describes the situation before either tiara or crown had been placed on a human head or scepter handed down. All these symbols of kingship, plus the shepherd's crook, the symbol of righteousness and justice, laid deposited before Anu in heaven. After the gods had reached their decision, however, kingship descended from heaven to earth. Both Sumerian and Akkadian texts state that the Nephilim retained the lordship over the lands and had mankind first rebuild the pre-diluvial cities exactly where they had originally been. And, as they had been planned, let the bricks of all the cities be laid on the dedicated places, let all the bricks rest on holy places. Ariel, then, was first